Hello again, this is Russ. I'm a biological sciences tutor here at Winston-Salem State University, and we're located in the first floor of Hill Hall. Today's lesson is going to be on cellular respiration. So if you watched my previous video, we talked about the cell. Now, in cellular respiration, we're talking specifically about what happens when you consume food, namely glucose, in the presence of oxygen, which is considered aerobic. Without oxygen is anaerobic. And that metabolizes into energy within the mitochondria. Now, cellular respiration begins with a process called glycolysis. Glycolysis is the breakdown of glucose, okay? You can do that anaerobically without oxygen, and you can also do that aerobically. If you do that anaerobically, you create something called lactic acid, which then causes cramps and pain in your body. So for example, if you went for a run and you're not used to running, you can have cramps in your legs because you don't have enough blood flow, enough oxygen down there. So once you start running, if you're in a sprint, you will cramp up and that will cause pain. You don't want that. Also, people who have sickle cell disease end up in sickle cell crisis where their red blood cells sickle due to lack of oxygen. And when that happens, then your body will also cramp up. The only treatment for sickle cell is pure oxygen. That relaxes those sickle cells and helps them return back to normal. Now, the respiration that we're talking about is aerobic respiration. So that's in the presence of oxygen, okay? And again, without oxygen, you will have glycolysis occur, but instead of getting the components for cellular respiration, you will end up with either lactic acid or alcohol. Wine, beer, spirits, things like that are done through fermentation in a low or no oxygen environment. And that's when sugar turns into alcohol. Like if you put some grapes in a jar and put them in a cool, damp place, like the basement or in the ground, and you come back in a few months or a year and you'll find yourself drinking some wine. So they put them in barrels and things like that. So you can create your own wine through the fermentation process, through the aerobic process. But again, today we're talking about the aerobic, not anaerobic. All right, so let's get right into it. So this is the mitochondria, okay? So mitochondria, again, utilize some source of food, whether it be carbs, proteins, lipids, in the presence of oxygen to aerobically break down that food source. And as a byproduct, you'll get CO2 and water vapor. CO2, carbon dioxide, ends up being a waste product that you exhale, and also water vapor. So if you were to breathe on a mirror, you would see it would fog up because you're also exhaling water vapor with that CO2. When you breathe in, you're bringing in oxygen. Now, oxygen is only 20% of the air, so the rest, mostly of it, is nitrogen. But you're utilizing that oxygen for this process called aerobic respiration. Okay, so the beginning of this is glycolysis. So if you see here, glycolysis is the process where you break down glucose in the cytoplasm. That's important to remember, in the cytoplasm of the cell, the liquid part of the cell, into pyruvate or pyruvic acid. Once you have that formed, then you can take that pyruvic acid into the mitochondria. It breaks down to something called acetyl coenzyme A, and that acetyl coenzyme A then turns the Krebs cycle or the citric acid cycle twice, okay? So this cycle here called the TCA, the citric acid, the Krebs cycle, it's all the same thing. It's found inside the mitochondria, and it basically uses the products that were broken down, these 3 carbon molecules that was broken down from sugar. Remember, sugar is a 6 carbon molecule. The formula is C6H12O6, and that 6 carbon molecule then gets broken down to 2 3 carbon molecules, pyruvic acid, and then acetyl coenzyme A. For every 1 turn of the Krebs cycle, because remember, you get 2 molecules of acetyl coenzyme A with 1 molecule of glucose. That process is in the cytoplasm. Once you break down the glucose, you get those 2 molecules of acetyl coenzyme A. You turn the Krebs cycle twice. That happens in the mitochondria. So when this Krebs cycle spins one time, you will get 3 molecules of NADH, 2 molecules of CO2. So once you break that down, then the NADH and what they call the FADH2, which is another molecule, which happens to be an energy storage unit, will also get sent to something called the electron transport chain, which is this part. Another word for the electron transport chain is called oxidative phosphorylation. Okay, so ETC, oxidative phosphorylation, is the same thing. That's also called chemoosmosis. That happens within the membranes of the mitochondria. Okay, so what you're going to find here is that you end up with 2 turns of the Krebs cycle, because remember, 1 glucose gives you 2 molecules of acetyl coenzyme A, which then turns this citric acid cycle twice. Okay, so for those 2 molecules of acetyl coenzyme A from the glycolysis, breaking down the glucose, you will get a total of 6 NADH2s and 2 FADH2s. Okay, so 6 NADHs, 2 FADH2s, and then 2 molecules of ATP. Now, the ATP you can already use because it's already energy. Okay, so and the CO2 is a byproduct which you exhale, which you're not going to use. Okay, it's amazing how plants take that CO2 and turn it back into oxygen for us to breathe. In the process, they make the glucose that we consume. So if you grab a strawberry or pick a grape or any kind of fruit like an apple, pear, peach, things like that, that glucose in that food came from the CO2. So the carbon in glucose, remember the formula for glucose is C6H12O6, has 6 carbons. So that comes from taking the CO2 out of the air, which is what we exhale. Animals and other living organisms exhale CO2. And the plants will utilize that and make oxygen. That's just amazing, okay? So CO2, sunlight, and water, and you can make glucose and oxygen using plants. So we need them. So the glucose that the plant generates, you consume, and you use it for energy, all right? The byproduct of breaking down that glucose, okay, through glycolysis and then through the cellular respiration in the mitochondria, gives you the CO2 that you exhale, okay? But it also gives you the ATP and then the NADHs and the FADH2. So 1 molecule of glucose gives you 6 in the Krebs cycle again, okay? This part gives you 6 NADHs and 2 FADH2s. Then those, the NADHs and FADH2s, then they go here to the oxidative phosphorylation or the electron transport chain. That process happens in the mitochondrial matrix. And then that process will end up giving you the bulk of your ATP. So if you ever have a question that says, what part of this process generates the most ATP? That's going to be the electron transport chain oxidative phosphorylation. This right here, okay? So that also happens in the mitochondria, but it happens in the mitochondrial matrix. So with this entire process, this 1 molecule of glucose that started over here in glycolysis will end up giving you 38 ATPs, okay? Now, it takes a couple of ATPs to get the glycolysis started. So you have to put energy into this process to get energy, okay? So kind of like the phrase, it takes money to make money. Well, it takes ATP to make ATP. So remember that. So I hope this video was very helpful for you. If you have any questions or would like to come see me, again, I'm in the 1st floor of Hill Hall. My name is Wes Ashaki. I'm a biological sciences tutor here at Winston-Salem State University. Have a great day.